The dust settled on Main Street as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the weathered buildings of Redemption Creek. The small mining town had seen better days since the initial gold rush had faded, leaving behind those too stubborn to leave, or too broken to start anew elsewhere. Among the latter was Tommy Reynolds, a man whose graceful movements belied the harshness of his surroundings. At 34, his once promising future as a stage performer in San Francisco had dissolved into nightly performances at the Lucky Strike Saloon, where he entertained rowdy miners and cattle drivers with elaborate dance routines that seemed out of place in such a rough establishment. Tommy had arrived in Redemption Creek 3 years prior, fleeing creditors and a scandal involving a theater owner's wife back in California. His handsome features, the strong jawline, piercing blue eyes, and carefully maintained mustache, combined with his remarkable dancing abilities, had quickly made him something of a local attraction, though hardly a respected one. On this particular evening, in the summer of 1878, Tommy was preparing for his performance with more care than usual. His calloused fingers smoothed down the lapels of his threadbare but meticulously maintained tailcoat, a relic from his days in legitimate theater. The Lucky Strike was expecting a special guest tonight, Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood. The elderly widow of mining magnate Harold Blackwood was making a rare appearance in town to discuss business with her late husband's associates. At 67, Eleanor was known throughout the territory, not only for her immense fortune, estimated to be worth over $500,000, but also for her sharp mind and even sharper tongue. Since her husband's death 5 years earlier, she had not only maintained but expanded his business interests, surprising many who had expected the delicate-looking woman to sell everything and retire to Boston or New York. Instead, she had proven herself to be a formidable businesswoman, commanding respect even in the male-dominated frontier. Tommy had heard rumors about Eleanor Blackwood's appreciation for the arts, and he was determined to catch her eye, though he hadn't yet formulated exactly what might come of such an encounter. "You're wasting your time, Reynolds," growled Patrick O'Malley, the barrel-chested owner of the Lucky Strike, as he observed Tommy's preparations. "That old vulture ain't interested in the likes of you. She's here to talk mining rights with the big boys." O'Malley's face, perpetually ruddy from whiskey and the blistering sun, creased with amusement. "Besides, what would you do if she did notice you? Recite poetry?" The saloon erupted in laughter, a sound Tommy had grown accustomed to over the years. He merely smiled in response, having learned long ago that dignity was a luxury he could ill afford in his position. The truth was, Tommy had developed a talent for charming wealthy women during his time in San Francisco, a skill that had kept him in fine clothes and good liquor until his inevitable fall from grace. While he hadn't had many opportunities to exercise this particular talent in Redemption Creek, the arrival of the wealthiest widow in the territory was too tempting to ignore. The saloon was unusually crowded that evening, filled not only with the regular clientele of miners, cowboys, and drifters, but also with businessmen in suits that looked out of place amid the frontier grime. Tommy peered through a gap in the curtain that served as a makeshift stage separator, spotting Eleanor Blackwood immediately. She sat at a reserved table near the front, surrounded by 3 men in expensive suits who leaned in attentively as she spoke. Even from a distance, Tommy could sense her commanding presence. Unlike most women of her age and station, she wore no widow's weeds, but was dressed in a deep burgundy dress with subtle black accents, mourning long past, but not forgotten. Her silver hair was arranged in an elegant updo, and a single strand of pearls adorned her neck. Despite the lines that mapped her face, there was something striking about her appearance, an elegance that seemed almost defiant in the rough surroundings of the Frontier Saloon. When Tommy took to the small stage, he performed with an intensity that surprised even the regular patrons. His routine combined elements of formal ballroom dancing with more theatrical movements, telling a story of love and loss without words. He had developed this particular performance during his time in San Francisco, and it had always been well received by more cultured audiences. In the Lucky Strike, it usually earned him confused stares and occasional mockery. But tonight, he noticed something different. Eleanor Blackwood was watching him with undisguised interest. As he executed a particularly difficult turn, he caught her eye and held her gaze for just a moment longer than propriety allowed. When he finished his performance to scattered applause and the usual calls for something livelier next time, he saw Eleanor lean over to one of her companions and whisper something. The man nodded, then stood and made his way toward the bar, where Tommy was accepting a glass of watered-down whiskey from O'Malley. "Mrs. Blackwood would like to speak with you, sir," the man said stiffly, his Eastern accent marking him as a recent arrival to the territory. Tommy nodded, affecting nonchalance despite the surge of excitement he felt. As he approached Eleanor's table, he was acutely aware of his shabby appearance compared to the wealth that surrounded her. Yet when she spoke, her voice was warm and carried no hint of condescension. "That was quite a performance, Mr. Reynolds. I haven't seen such dancing since my last visit to New York." Tommy bowed slightly, years of training surfacing automatically. "You honor me, Mrs. Blackwood. I'm afraid Redemption Creek isn't known for its appreciation of the finer arts." Eleanor's laugh was surprisingly rich, with none of the fragility one might expect from a woman of her years. "No, I suppose not. But that makes finding such talent here all the more remarkable. Please, join me. I find myself in need of conversation that doesn't revolve entirely around ore samples and extraction costs." The invitation raised eyebrows among Eleanor's business associates, but none dared object. Tommy sat carefully, conscious of the eyes upon them. "I understand you were once a performer of some note in San Francisco," Eleanor continued, surprising Tommy with her knowledge of his past. "I make it a point to learn about interesting people, Mr. Reynolds," she explained, noting his expression. "And a man of your talents performing in an establishment like this raises certain questions." Rather than being intimidated, Tommy found himself charmed by her directness. "Life takes unexpected turns, Mrs. Blackwood. I've found that the frontier is more forgiving of past indiscretions than more civilized places." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully, her shrewd eyes suggesting she understood exactly what kind of indiscretions might drive a man of culture to hide in a mining town. Indeed, the West offers second chances to those bold enough to seize them. Their conversation continued well into the evening, touching on theater, literature, and eventually, more personal matters. Over the following 2 weeks, Eleanor extended her stay in Redemption Creek beyond her original business arrangements, and Tommy became a frequent visitor to the town's only hotel, where she occupied the finest suite. Their unlikely friendship blossomed rapidly, raising eyebrows and triggering gossip throughout the small community. To most observers, the relationship seemed to revolve around Eleanor's appreciation for culture and Tommy's eager willingness to provide entertaining stories of his theatrical past. If some speculated that the handsome dancer had less wholesome motivations for cultivating the friendship of a wealthy widow, they kept such thoughts largely to themselves, at least when in earshot of Eleanor's business associates, who remained protective of their employer, despite their own misgivings. For Tommy, the relationship represented an unexpected opportunity. While he had initially approached Eleanor with vague notions of financial advantage, he found himself genuinely enjoying her company and sharp wit. Eleanor, for her part, seemed to blossom in Tommy's presence. The businesswoman who had arrived in town was gradually replaced by a more animated version who laughed freely and reminisced about her younger days traveling with her late husband. Harold was always more interested in what was beneath the ground than what was upon it, she confided one evening as they shared a private dinner in her suite. He appreciated beauty in the form of raw minerals and investment opportunities. I fear I was something of a disappointment to him in my insistence on surrounding myself with art and music. Tommy reached across the table and took her hand, a gesture that would have seemed scandalous to observers, but had become natural between them. Then he failed to recognize the most valuable treasure he possessed, he replied, his voice low and sincere. The words were practiced. Tommy had used similar lines countless times in his past, but to his surprise, he found himself meaning them. The town's reaction to the developing relationship between the unlikely pair ranged from amusement to outrage. Sheriff James Wilson, a grizzled veteran of the frontier with a strong sense of propriety, made a point of warning Eleanor about fortune hunters and charlatans during a chance encounter on the boardwalk. "I appreciate your concern, Sheriff," Eleanor had responded with a tight smile, "but I've been managing my affairs successfully for nearly 70 years now. I suspect I can continue to do so without assistance." O'Malley, seeing an opportunity to capitalize on the situation, began promoting Tommy's performances more aggressively, billing him as the dancer who captured a fortune, much to Tommy's embarrassment. The dancer found himself in an increasingly uncomfortable position. While he genuinely enjoyed Eleanor's company, the public perception of him as a gold digger stung more than he had anticipated. His past experiences had left him well acquainted with being the subject of gossip and disdain. But somehow, in this instance, it felt different. The proposal came unexpectedly, not from Tommy, but from Eleanor herself. They were walking along the creek that gave the town its name, away from prying eyes and wagging tongues. The late afternoon sun bathed the landscape in golden light, softening the harsh realities of the mining town in the distance. "I have a proposition for you, Thomas," Eleanor said, using his full name as she always did in more serious moments. "I find myself enjoying your company far more than I anticipated, and at my age, I've learned not to waste time with unnecessary hesitation." She turned to face him directly, her expression unreadable. "I would like you to consider marriage." Tommy stopped walking, genuinely stunned, despite having entertained similar thoughts himself. "Eleanor, the town already thinks I'm after your money. If we were to marry, they would never believe." She cut him off with a wave of her hand. "I have never concerned myself overmuch with what others think, Thomas. It's a luxury of age and wealth. But there's more," she continued, her voice taking on a more businesslike tone. "I am not proposing a traditional marriage. I have had that experience, and while I treasured Harold, I have no desire to repeat it exactly." He asked, the blunt question emerging before he could soften it. Rather than being offended, Eleanor smiled appreciatively at his directness. You would be well provided for, of course. Not my entire fortune. My late husband's family and various business interests must receive their due, but enough to ensure you never dance in a saloon again, unless it is by choice. The wedding was a small affair, held in Eleanor's hotel suite with only a handful of witnesses present. A local judge who performed the ceremony, Eleanor's lawyer who had rushed from Denver upon receiving her telegram, and two of her most trusted business associates. Conspicuously absent were any friends of the groom. Tommy had made acquaintances, but few real connections during his time in Redemption Creek. The town erupted in gossip when news of the marriage spread, with reactions ranging from disbelief to outright condemnation. Sheriff Wilson made his disapproval known by pointedly ignoring Tommy when they passed on the street. O'Malley, deprived of his star attraction, spread particularly vicious rumors about Tommy's past and motivations. None of this seemed to bother Eleanor, who proceeded with her business affairs while making arrangements for their departure to her main residence, a sprawling ranch property some 50 miles from town. For Tommy, the days following the wedding were a whirlwind of new experiences. He was fitted for new clothes by Eleanor's personal tailor, who had been summoned from Denver. He was introduced to the complexities of Eleanor's business interests, though she made it clear that while she welcomed his input, the final decisions would remain hers. Most surprisingly, he found himself genuinely happy in his new role. There was an ease to their relationship, a mutual respect and affection that transcended their unusual circumstances. In private moments, he sometimes wondered if he deserved this unexpected turn of fortune, particularly given his initial mercenary intentions. "You're thinking too loudly," Eleanor remarked one evening as they sat in the hotel's private dining room. "I can practically hear the guilt rattling around in that handsome head of yours." Tommy smiled ruefully, still amazed by her ability to read him so easily. "I just wonder if you know what you've gotten yourself into, marrying a man with my reputation." Eleanor's response was interrupted by the arrival of a telegram. As she read it, her expression shifted from mild annoyance to grave concern. "There's been some trouble at the ranch," she explained, folding the paper carefully. "Nothing catastrophic, but it requires my immediate attention." She fixed Tommy with a serious look. "I had hoped we would travel there together, but I fear I must leave tomorrow morning." Tommy nodded, understanding the demands of her position. "I'll come with you," he offered, but Eleanor shook her head. "No, there are matters here that need concluding. My lawyer will remain to assist you, and you can follow in a week's time when everything is settled." Though disappointed, Tommy agreed to the arrangement. That night, as they prepared for sleep, Eleanor took his hand with, "Thomas, I want you to know that regardless of how our arrangement began, I consider myself fortunate to have found you at this stage of my life." The sincerity in her voice moved him deeply. "The fortune is entirely mine," he replied softly. Eleanor departed the next morning on the early stage, leaving Tommy to finalize various business matters in Redemption Creek with the assistance of her lawyer, a serious young man named Edward Harrington. Despite his initial reservations about his client's unusual marriage, Harrington proved to be professionally courteous to Tommy, guiding him through the process of signing various documents and explaining elements of Eleanor's business interests that would now tangentially involve him. The days passed productively, and Tommy found himself unexpectedly enjoying his new status in the town. While some still regarded him with suspicion, others particularly the local merchants, had quickly adjusted their attitudes in light of his new financial standing. O'Malley, previously his harshest critic, now greeted him with forced joviality whenever he passed the lucky strike. Remarkable how money changes people's perceptions, Tommy observed to Harrington during a meeting at the hotel, exactly 1 week after Eleanor's departure. As Tommy was preparing to join her at the ranch, a rider arrived in town bearing an urgent message for Harrington. Tommy was reviewing their travel arrangements when the lawyer entered the hotel suite, his face ashen. "Mr. Reynolds," he began formally, despite the relatively friendly relationship they had developed over the week, "I regret to inform you that Mrs. Blackwood, that is, your wife, has passed away." The words seemed to hang in the air between them, incomprehensible despite their clarity. "That's impossible," Tommy responded automatically. "She was in perfect health when she left." Harrington nodded grimly. "According to the ranch manager, she suffered a sudden collapse yesterday evening. The doctor attributes it to her heart." Tommy sank into a chair, genuine shock and grief washing over him. Despite the unusual nature of their relationship, he had come to care deeply for Eleanor in the short time they had known each other. "I need to go to her," he said after a moment of silence. The journey to Eleanor's ranch was the longest of Tommy's life. As the stagecoach rattled over rough terrain, his mind filled with memories of their brief time together and regrets for the future they would never share. He had entered her life with calculated intentions, but had found himself transformed by her intelligence, wit, and unexpected kindness. Now, facing the reality as her death, he felt a loss far deeper than the financial security that had initially drawn him to her. Upon arriving at the ranch, an impressive property with a main house that rivaled many Eastern mansions in size and elegance, Tommy was met by the ranch manager, a weathered man named Robert Cooper, who regarded him with poorly concealed suspicion. "Mrs. Blackwood's body has been prepared for burial," Cooper informed him stiffly. "Her family plot is on the east side of the property, as per her instructions." The funeral was held the following day, a surprisingly large affair attended by business associates, employees, and neighbors from surrounding ranches. Tommy stood apart from the main gathering, acutely aware of the whispers and sidelong glances directed his way. He had expected to be treated as a grieving widower. Instead, the prevailing attitude seemed to be one of suspicion bordering on hostility. When the service concluded, Harrington, who had traveled separately to the ranch, approached him with a grave expression. "Mr. Reynolds, there are certain matters we must discuss immediately." A lawyer led Tommy to what had been Eleanor's study, a room lined with books and dominated by a massive oak desk. "Before we proceed, I must ask, did Mrs. Blackwood discuss the terms of her will with you?" Tommy shook his head. "Only in general terms. She mentioned I would be provided for, but gave no specifics." Harrington nodded, seeming unsurprised. "Mrs. Blackwood made a new will immediately following your marriage," he explained, removing a document from his briefcase. "However, there have been complications." Tommy tensed, sensing bad news approaching. "What kind of complications?" The lawyer chose his words carefully. "Certain parties, specifically Mrs. Blackwood's late husband's family, have raised concerns about the circumstances of your marriage and the timing of her death." Tommy stood abruptly. "Are they suggesting I had something to do with her death? That's absurd. I wasn't even present." Harrington raised a placating hand. "I understand your frustration, Mr. Reynolds, but you must see how it appears from an outside perspective. A young man with a questionable past marries a wealthy widow, and she dies unexpectedly a week later. It raises questions. "What exactly are you saying?" Tommy demanded, his voice tight with anger and grief. Harrington sighed. "The Blackwood family is contesting the will. They're claiming undue influence and suggesting the possibility of foul play." Tommy paled at the implication. "That's ridiculous. There will be an investigation, of course. The doctor has already provided his opinion on the cause of death. But given the circumstances, the sheriff from the nearest county seat has been notified." Tommy sank back into his chair, the full weight of his situation becoming clear. "So not only have I lost my wife, but I'm now a murder suspect?" Harrington didn't contradict him, which was answer enough. "What does the will actually say?" Tommy asked after a moment, realizing he didn't even know what he was being accused of killing for. The lawyer hesitated before responding. "Mrs. Blackwood left you this property, the ranch and its contents, along with a sum of $20,000. The bulk of her business interests and remaining fortune revert to various family members and business partners, as was arranged in her previous will." Tommy absorbed this information with a growing sense of dread. The inheritance was substantial, far more than he had ever possessed, but not the vast fortune that would make him a prime suspect in the eyes of the law. "The irony is, I didn't marry her for money," he said quietly. "Not entirely, anyway. I came to care for her deeply." Harrington's expression softened slightly. "For what it's worth, Mr. Reynolds, I believe you. Mrs. Blackwood was not easily fooled, and she spoke highly of you in our private conversations. But my belief won't matter much against the influence of the Blackwood family." The following days brought a whirlwind of legal and personal challenges. The county sheriff, a man named Everett Mills, arrived to investigate the circumstances of Eleanor's death. Though professional in his approach, his skepticism regarding Tommy's innocence was evident in every question he asked. "Quite a stroke of luck, wasn't it?" he remarked during one particularly tense interview. "Meeting a wealthy widow who takes a shine to you, then inheriting a prime piece of property barely a week after saying, 'I do'?" Tommy maintained his composure with difficulty. "There was nothing lucky about finding someone I connected with, only to lose her before our life together could truly begin." Sheriff Mills merely nodded, making notes in a small book he carried. Meanwhile, the ranch hands and house staff maintained a cold distance from Tommy, clearly viewing him as an interloper rather than their new employer. Robert Cooper, the ranch manager who had served Eleanor for over 15 years, made his opinion clear during a confrontation in the stables. "She was fine before she met you," he stated bluntly as Tommy was examining one of the horses, seeking any distraction from the cloud of suspicion surrounding him. "Mrs. Blackwood had a heart condition for years," Tommy countered, recalling information Harrington had shared from the doctor's examination. "She never mentioned it to me, but apparently it was well documented." Cooper spat on the ground dismissively. "Convenient that it acted up right after she married a penniless dancer." Tommy fought down the urge to respond angrily, aware that antagonizing the man who effectively ran the ranch would only complicate his situation further. "I understand your loyalty to Mrs. Blackwood," he said instead. "It's one of the qualities I'm sure she valued in you." The turning point came 10 days after Eleanor's funeral, with the arrival of a letter addressed to Tommy in Eleanor's distinctive handwriting. Harrington delivered it personally, explaining that it had been entrusted to him with instructions to deliver it only in the event of her death. Tommy received the envelope with trembling hands, retreating to the privacy of the study to read its contents. My dear Thomas, Eleanor had written. The letter continued, explaining that she had been aware of her failing health for some time, a fact she had deliberately concealed from Tommy. The doctors in Denver gave me 6 months at most, though they acknowledged the unpredictable nature of heart conditions such as mine. I chose not to burden you with this knowledge, partly out of pride and partly because I wished our time together to be unmarred by the shadow of impending loss. Tommy read on, tears blurring his vision as Eleanor's words revealed the full truth of their situation. I proposed marriage not merely for companionship, but to ensure you would be provided for after my passing. My family, or rather Harold's family, as we were never blessed with children, has always disapproved of my independence and would certainly have contested any bequest to a mere acquaintance. As my husband, your claim is stronger, though I have no doubt they will still challenge it. The letter continued with practical advice regarding the ranch and warnings about specific family members who might prove particularly troublesome. It concluded with words that Tommy would treasure for years to come. Know that in our brief time together, you brought more joy into my life than I had experienced in many years. What began as a practical arrangement became something I treasure. Live well, Thomas, and remember me not with sadness, but with the same warmth you brought into my final days. The letter changed everything, not legally, perhaps, but in terms of Tommy's emotional state and his approach to the challenges facing him. He immediately shared its contents with Harrington, who recognized its potential value in countering the family's accusations. This doesn't prove you didn't hasten her death, the lawyer cautioned, but it establishes that she had prior knowledge of her condition and made deliberate plans regarding her estate. Tommy nodded, understanding the distinction. I don't care about that right now. I need people to know I didn't marry her under false pretenses. At least, not entirely. The letter also gave him a new perspective on his inheritance. The ranch wasn't merely property he had acquired through an advantageous marriage. It was Eleanor's final gift, entrusted to him because she believed he would value and maintain it properly. Armed with this new understanding, Tommy approached Sheriff Mills, voluntarily providing Eleanor's letter and requesting a more thorough review of her medical history. I've nothing to hide, Sheriff, he stated firmly. I want the truth about my wife's death to be established as clearly as possible, both for my sake and for her memory. Impressed by this approach, or perhaps simply responding to the evidence it provided, Mills agreed to consult with Eleanor's physicians in Denver. The investigation continued, but with noticeably less focus on Tommy as a suspect. Meanwhile, Tommy began the process of learning about ranch operations, spending long hours with Cooper, despite the manager's continued coolness. Mrs. Blackwood, Eleanor, wanted this place maintained properly, Tommy explained during one such session. I owe it to her to understand how it works, even if I lack experience. Gradually, the truth emerged through the combined efforts of Sheriff Mills, Harrington, and Eleanor's doctors in Denver. Eleanor had indeed suffered from a heart condition for several years, carefully concealed from all but her most trusted associates. Her decision to marry Tommy had been influenced by her knowledge of her limited time. Though, as her letter made clear, the affection between them had been genuine. The Blackwood family, faced with this evidence and the clear legal standing of the will, eventually withdrew their more serious accusations, though they continued to contest certain aspects of the inheritance in court. Tommy found himself in the strange position of defending not only his inheritance, but also the legitimacy of his feelings for a woman he had known for such a short time. She knew exactly what she was doing, he explained to Harrington during one particularly difficult legal meeting. That was Eleanor's way, seeing clearly, planning carefully, and acting decisively. 6 months after Eleanor's death, Tommy Reynolds still resided at the ranch, though not without significant changes. He had sold a portion of the property, land that was difficult to manage and far from the main house, to raise capital for improvements to the remaining ranch. Under Cooper's grudging guidance, he had learned the basics of ranch management, though he relied heavily on experienced hands for the actual operation. The house, once formal and somewhat austere, now reflected Tommy's theatrical background, with spaces converted for music and reading. Most significantly, he had established a small school of dance on the property, offering lessons to the children of neighboring ranchers and townspeople. The initial skepticism had gradually given way to cautious acceptance as Tommy demonstrated his commitment to honoring Eleanor's legacy while creating something new from what she had left him. On the anniversary of their wedding, Tommy visited Eleanor's grave in the family plot on the eastern edge of the property. He placed a bouquet of wildflowers, her favorite, against the simple but elegant headstone. "You knew, didn't you?" he spoke softly, the words carrying away on the prairie wind. "Not just about your heart, but about mine as well. You saw something in me worth saving, worth giving a second chance." He stood in silence for a long moment, remembering their brief time together and the unexpected ways in which she had changed his life. The poor saloon dancer, who had married a wealthy widow for her money, had indeed found a fortune, though not the one he had initially sought. As he turned to walk back to the house, his house now, in both law and spirit, Tommy reflected on the strange trick fate had played on them both. Eleanor had married him knowing she had little time left, offering him a future she wouldn't share. And he, who had entered the marriage with calculations of financial gain, had found something far more valuable: purpose, respect, and a chance to become the man Eleanor had somehow seen beneath the dancer's practiced smile. The sun was setting over the vast prairie as Tommy reached the main house, casting the landscape in gold and amber hues that reminded him of Eleanor's favorite brooch. Inside, the lamps were being lit by the staff, no longer distant and suspicious, but now accustomed to their unusual employer, with his Eastern mannerisms and unexpected knowledge of ranching operations. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: a meeting with the neighboring rancher about water rights, a dance lesson for the sheriff's daughter, who showed remarkable talent, and continued legal discussions with Harrington about the remaining contested portions of Eleanor's estate. But tonight, Tommy would sit in what had been Eleanor's favorite chair, perhaps read from one of her books, and raise a glass of her preferred brandy in quiet tribute. The dancer had found his stage, and though it was not the one he had envisioned, he would perform his role with the grace Eleanor had recognized in him from the first moment she saw him dance. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.